What's happening? I don't know what's happening. We're losing control of the aircraft here. We lost all control of the aircraft.
On June 1st, 2009, a routine international flight from Rio de Janeiro to Paris took off under what seemed like ordinary circumstances. Air France Flight 447, an Airbus A330, was carrying 216 passengers and 12 crew members, all expecting a smooth journey across the vast Atlantic Ocean. But as the flight ascended into the night sky, a series of unforeseen events would soon transform this journey into one of the most tragic and mysterious aviation disasters in modern history. Flight 447 would never reach its destination. Just over 4 hours into the flight, it would crash into the ocean, raising more questions than answers. It would take years of investigation, a global search effort, and a deep analysis of technical malfunctions and human error for the world to understand what went wrong. What led to the crash of this seemingly safe aircraft? Tonight, we will explore everything that happened on that fateful night. How a combination of technology failure, human error, and miscommunication collided, leading to the tragic loss of 228 lives. Join us as we take you step by step through the timeline of events, the lessons learned, and the lasting impact this disaster has had on aviation safety. This is the untold story of Air France Flight 447. Air France Flight 447 took off from Rio de Janeiro at 7:29 p.m. local time. The Airbus A330, known for its reliability, was designed to handle long-haul routes. On board, the flight crew included Captain Marc Dubois, a seasoned pilot with over 11,000 flight hours, First Officer Pierre-Cédric Bonin with 3,000 hours, and Second Officer David Robert. While Captain Dubois had extensive experience, he was not in the cockpit when critical events began to unfold. First Officer Bonin was at the controls when things began to go wrong. Although skilled, his limited experience would soon prove significant. Second Officer Robert was present, but played a minimal role during the critical moments of the flight. The flight was scheduled to cruise at 35,000 feet, navigating over the tropical regions. However, as the aircraft entered the intertropical convergence zone, known for its severe storms, conditions began to deteriorate. By 2 a.m. GMT, the turbulence intensified. At this point, the aircraft was cruising at 35,000 feet, and the pilots were preparing for the extreme weather ahead. As they entered an area of severe thunderstorms, the aircraft jolted violently, crossing into a patch of unstable air masses. The turbulence was intense, but the aircraft was designed to handle such conditions. What followed, however, would be far more subtle and dangerous. At 2:10 a.m., the aircraft's pitot tubes, critical instruments responsible for measuring airspeed, became obstructed by ice. These tubes, mounted on the aircraft's exterior, measure air pressure and send that data to the flight control systems. Under normal circumstances, they operate efficiently, but in the extreme cold and turbulent storm, they froze, leading to unreliable airspeed readings. With the autopilot disengaged due to faulty readings, the crew faced a critical situation. Autopilot systems are designed to relieve pilots from manual control, maintaining stable flight. But now, the crew had to manually control the aircraft under chaotic conditions. First Officer Bonin struggled to stabilize the aircraft, and confusion set in. Despite their training, the crew failed to recognize the stall condition, a situation where the aircraft no longer has sufficient lift to stay airborne. The stall warning sounded, but Bonin did not respond appropriately. The aircraft began descending rapidly, losing altitude at an alarming rate. As the pressure mounted, communication among the crew faltered. Bonin hesitated, unsure of how to correct the stall. His limited experience with high-altitude stall recovery left him in a reactive state, struggling to regain control. The critical actions required to recover from a stall, lowering the nose to regain speed, were not executed in time. At 2:14 a.m. GMT, the aircraft was in a full stall. The stall warning blared, but the crew remained uncertain of how to respond. The aircraft continued to lose altitude, and despite their desperate attempts to recover, the situation worsened. They were now facing a catastrophic scenario. As the clock ticked closer to 2:14 a.m. GMT, Flight 447 was now in a dire situation. The pilots had been struggling for several minutes to regain control after the autopilot disengaged, but the true gravity of the situation was becoming painfully clear. The Airbus A330, a highly advanced aircraft, was descending rapidly, and the stall warning was sounding repeatedly, but the crew's ability to respond effectively was hindered by a combination of technical malfunctions and human error. To fully understand what happened in the final moments, we need to consider the factors that led to this catastrophic event. The combination of faulty pitot tubes, which had frozen due to the icy conditions at high altitude, and the pilot's failure to recognize the impending stall, created a perfect storm of confusion and panic. At 2:10 a.m. GMT, the aircraft's AA pitot tubes became blocked by ice, rendering them unable to provide accurate airspeed readings. These sensors are critical for determining whether the plane is in a stable flight path, and their malfunction sent inaccurate data to the aircraft's flight systems. Without the necessary information from the pitot tubes, the autopilot disengaged, forcing the pilots to take over manual control. But with conflicting information and a sense of urgency mounting, the flight crew's responses began to falter. At this point, First Officer Bonin, who was at the controls, was faced with a rapidly deteriorating situation. The aircraft was now in a dangerous high-altitude stall, meaning it no longer had enough lift to stay in the air. While the stall warning alarm blared in the cockpit, signalling the imminent danger, Bonin's response was not immediate. His training and limited experience in high-altitude stall recovery were insufficient to overcome the mounting pressure. As the aircraft descended and the stall conditions worsened, the pilots struggled to regain control. However, Bonin's confusion, compounded by his uncertainty in how to recover from the stall, led to further mistakes. The critical maneuver in Marzi. Such a situation is to lower the aircraft's nose to regain airspeed and lift, but Bonin failed to execute this action in time. Instead, he inadvertently pulled the nose up, worsening the stall condition and causing the aircraft to lose altitude even more rapidly. While the aircraft was plummeting, the communication between Bonin and Second Officer Robert was marked by hesitation and uncertainty. The lack of clear instructions and decisive action from the crew was evident as the aircraft continued its uncontrolled descent. In the midst of this chaos, Captain Dubois, the most experienced pilot on board, was not in the cockpit. He had been resting at the time the critical situation unfolded. By the time he returned to the flight deck, it was too late. The tragic irony of this moment is that, despite all the sophisticated technology on board and the extensive training the crew had received, they were not equipped to handle the combination of technical failure and human error. With each passing second, the aircraft's descent accelerated, and the chances of recovery dwindled. At 2:14 a.m. GMT, Flight 447 was in freefall. The stall warning had been sounding for several minutes, and the aircraft had now reached a critical altitude. The aircraft was no longer flying. It was descending rapidly toward the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Just 3 minutes after the stall warning first sounded, the aircraft struck the ocean at high speed. The crash was a catastrophic event, and the impact was devastating. Flight 447's wreckage scattered across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The magnitude of the crash was incomprehensible. The loss of 228 lives, including passengers and crew, was an irreplaceable tragedy. After the crash, the search for survivors began immediately. However, the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, combined with the depth at which the aircraft had gone down, made the recovery effort a monumental challenge. The wreckage was spread across a large area, and the location of the crash site was initially unknown. Search and rescue teams from several countries began working around the clock to locate any sign of debris and to recover the bodies of the passengers and crew. In the first few days, floating wreckage and debris were discovered, offering hope that the crash site might soon be located. But despite extensive efforts, the flight data recorders, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data recorder, FDR, remained elusive. These devices are crucial for understanding the final moments of a flight, and their absence left investigators with little information about the exact sequence of events. Over the next several months, the search continued, with the assistance of advanced technology, including underwater drones and submersibles capable of reaching depths of nearly 4,000 meters. The search was grueling, but after nearly 2 years of extensive efforts, the wreckage was finally found in May 2011. The FDR and CVR were located, and with this, the investigation into the causes of the crash could begin in earnest. The recovery of the flight data recorders marked the turning point in the investigation. The French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, BEA, along with international teams of experts, began analysing the data to reconstruct the final moments of Flight 447. From the recovered black boxes, it became clear that the primary cause of the crash was a combination of factors. The malfunctioning pitot tubes, which had caused erroneous airspeed readings, were the first critical failure. This led to the disengagement of the autopilot system and forced the pilots to manually control the aircraft under rapidly deteriorating conditions. However, the investigation also revealed that the crew's failure to recognise the stall condition and their inadequate response were significant contributors to the disaster. The stall warning system had sounded repeatedly, but the crew did not take immediate corrective action. Instead of lowering the nose of the aircraft to regain airspeed, the pilots struggled to regain control, leading to a steep and uncontrollable descent. The BEA's investigation found that the stall recovery procedures followed by the crew were flawed. Despite extensive training, the crew's inability to act decisively in the face of a high-altitude stall was a critical factor in the crash. While some investigators pointed to the lack of clear communication and coordination among the crew, others noted that the extreme conditions, compounded by the freezing temperatures and turbulence, played a significant role in the breakdown of decision-making. The investigation highlighted the malfunctioning pitot tubes as a critical factor. The ice obstruction led to unreliable airspeed readings, causing the autopilot to disengage. Additionally, the crew's failure to recognise the stall condition and their inadequate communication during the emergency were significant contributors to the tragedy. In the wake of the tragedy, major reforms were implemented to prevent similar accidents. The lessons learned from Flight 447 led to critical changes in pilot training, particularly in stall recovery techniques. Enhanced simulator training now includes scenarios that mimic the conditions faced by Flight 447, ensuring pilots are better prepared for emergencies. Technological advancements have also been made. Newer aircraft models are equipped with more sophisticated sensors and redundancy systems, providing pilots with accurate data even in adverse conditions. The aviation industry has made significant strides in improving safety protocols and ensuring that similar malfunctions are less likely to occur. The tragic loss of Flight 447 was not only a profound personal tragedy for the families and friends of the 228 individuals aboard, but it also sent shockwaves through the global aviation industry. In the aftermath, numerous investigations were launched, not only by the French authorities, but also by international organisations, as the implications of this event were felt across the world. While the emotional toll on the victims' families was immeasurable, the broader aviation community knew that this tragedy could never be allowed to happen again. The public demanded answers, and the industry needed to rebuild trust. The investigation into Flight 447 was one of the most extensive in aviation history, and its findings would shape aviation safety for decades to come. At the core of the disaster was a combination of human error and technological failure, two forces that tragically collided. The malfunction of the pitot tubes, which provided inaccurate airspeed readings, was the initial technical issue that set the events into motion. However, the lack of response from the flight crew to the stall condition further compounded the situation. It wasn't just the malfunctioning instruments, it was also the breakdown in human judgment and decision-making. Under extreme pressure, many critics and experts pointed out that the airline industry had come a long way in terms of technology and safety features, but the human factor remained one of the most critical vulnerabilities in aviation. Training in recognizing and recovering from stalls, particularly at high altitudes, was not adequate at the time. Pilot fatigue and stress also played a role, as both First Officer Bonin and Second Officer Robert were under intense pressure to manage the situation, while also dealing with the chaos caused by malfunctioning instruments. After the flight, Data recorders were finally recovered in 2011. The detailed analysis began. It was a painstaking process. The wreckage was scattered across an expansive area of the Atlantic Ocean, and retrieving the black box which held the flight's vital data was no easy task. The technological advancements used to locate the wreckage, submersibles, remotely operated vehicles and underwater drones, highlighted the lengths to which the global community was willing to go to uncover the truth. Once recovered, the cheat black box provided a crucial window into the final moments of Flight 447. Audio recordings from the cockpit revealed the crew's frantic attempts to regain control of the aircraft. The sound of the stall warning blaring in the background, combined with the crew's confusion and lack of decisive action, painted a harrowing picture of what happened in those final minutes. One of the most significant outcomes of the Air France Corsi Flight 447 investigation was the overhaul in pilot training. Recognizing the gaps in stall recovery training, the aviation industry responded by incorporating more realistic and challenging training scenarios into flight simulators. Pilots now undergo rigorous training on how to handle high-altitude stalls, particularly when the autopilot disengages unexpectedly. The goal is to prepare pilots for situations where both technology and human error could contribute to a crisis. The airline industry also placed greater emphasis on cockpit communication, especially in emergency situations. Clear, calm communication is essential when lives are on the line. As part of these reforms, the sterile cockpit rule was strengthened, which mandates that only critical communications occur during moments of high stress, ensuring that flight crews focus on solving the problem at hand without unnecessary distractions. Technological advances following the disaster also played a key role in improving aviation safety. Modern aircraft now come equipped with more sophisticated sensors and backup systems designed to prevent similar failures. These systems provide multiple layers of data redundancy, ensuring that if one sensor or instrument fails, others will continue to operate normally. One notable improvement was in the design and functionality of pitot tubes. Newer models feature heated tubes, which prevent ice from obstructing the flow of air needed to measure airspeed. This change directly addresses one of the main issues faced by Flight 447, as the ice buildup was a significant contributing factor to the crash. Additionally, there have been significant improvements in the way flight data is transmitted and analysed in real time. Some newer aircraft are equipped with systems that send data to ground-based monitoring centres, allowing aviation authorities to track the aircraft's condition during the flight and intervene if necessary. For the families of the victims, the long search for closure was equally as painful. The physical recovery of the wreckage was only one part of the journey. In the years following the crash, Air France and the French government worked to provide support to the families, many of whom had been left with unanswered questions. Memorials were established in honour of the victims, and ongoing support was offered to the loved ones who had to cope with the grief of such a sudden and tragic loss. The remembrance of the lives lost in this disaster remains a poignant symbol of the human cost of the aviation industry's evolution. The legacy of Flight 447 serves as a constant reminder of the importance of safety in aviation. It's a reminder that the pursuit of safety is never finished, and that the lives of those on board Flight 447 can inspire continued progress in the aviation industry. While aviation has made significant strides in safety and technology since the tragedy, it's important to remember that each disaster teaches us valuable lessons. The legacy of Flight 447 continues to influence how pilots are trained, how aircraft are designed, and how the aviation community responds to crises. The legacy of Air France Flight 447 lives on in the changes it sparked within the aviation industry. While the tragedy of losing 228 lives is immeasurable, the reforms and innovations that followed have made air travel safer for everyone. The victims are remembered through memorials and tributes, and their legacy continues to influence aviation safety culture. As we reflect on the events of June 1, 2009, we honour the memory of those who lost their lives on Air France Flight 447. Their legacy is one of transformation and progress in aviation safety, reminding us all that every life lost is a call for improvement and vigilance. Thank you for joining us in this detailed exploration of one of the most devastating aviation disasters in modern history. If you found this account insightful, please like, share and subscribe to our channel. We welcome your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and remember, safety in aviation is a shared responsibility.